The sun hadn't even crested the hills yet, but inside the small rust-colored hut near the edge of town, the air already felt heavy. Not from heat, though that would come soon enough, but from silence. The kind of silence that settles when there's nothing left to say, nothing left to hope for, and only the hollow ache of an empty stomach to keep you company. He sat on the floor, back against the cracked mud wall, knees drawn up, eyes fixed on the single steel pot in the corner. It was clean, too clean. No rice stuck to the sides, no lentil stains, not even a drop of oil shimmering at the bottom. Just polished metal reflecting the dim morning light sneaking through the gaps in the tin roof. His children were still asleep on the thin mat beside him, curled together like two small birds seeking warmth. The boy, barely 5, had one hand tucked under his cheek. The girl, a little older, clutched a ragged cloth doll to her chest, the same one she'd had since she was a baby. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. Not really, a few dry rotis soaked in water, maybe a pinch of salt. But the children? He made sure they had something every evening, even if it was just watery dal with a single spoonful of rice stretched thin. He'd told them stories while they ate, tales of brave farmers, clever monkeys, and rivers that sang at night. Anything to distract them from how little was in their bowls. They never complained. They trusted him completely. That trust was heavier than hunger. Just 6 months ago, things had been different. He'd worked steadily on construction sites, climbing scaffolds, mixing cement, shouting orders to younger workers. His hands were rough, his back often sore, but his pockets jingled with coins at the end of each week. Enough for rice, vegetables, school books, even the occasional sweet from the street vendor. Then came the accident. A steel beam slipped. He jumped, instinct, but twisted his leg badly on the way down. No broken bones, the doctor said, but ligaments torn, muscles strained. Rest, they told him. At least 2 months. 2 months without work meant 2 months without pay. And in his line of work, if you didn't show up, someone else took your place. By the time he could walk without wincing, his spot was gone. He tried other sites, smaller jobs, odd repairs, but no one wanted a man who limped. Too slow, they'd say, or just shake their heads and turn away. His wife had passed 3 years earlier, fever, sudden and cruel, and since then, it had just been him and the kids. No family nearby. No savings to fall back on. Every rupee earned was spent the same day. Now with no income and winter fading into a harsh summer, the cupboard had emptied faster than he could refill it. He reached into his pocket, not for money, there was none, but for the one thing he still owned that held real value. His watch. Not fancy. No gold, no brand name. Just a simple stainless steel timepiece with a worn leather strap. But it had belonged to his father, a school teacher in a village far away. The old man had saved for months to buy it, then handed it to him on his wedding day with a quiet smile and these words: "Time is precious, but love is timeless." He'd worn it every day since. Through weddings, births, funerals, job interviews, long nights worrying. It wasn't just a watch, it was a promise. A reminder of where he came from and the kind of man he wanted to be. Now he turned it over in his palm. The glass was scratched, the numbers faded, but it still ticked. Steady, reliable, like his father had been. Outside, a rooster crowed. The children stirred. The girl opened her eyes first, blinking sleep away. She saw him holding the watch and smiled faintly. "Papa, is it time for breakfast?" His throat tightened. He forced a smile. "Almost, Beta, just getting ready." She nodded and snuggled closer to her brother, already drifting back into dreams of full bellies and safe days. He stood slowly, wincing as his bad leg protested. He walked to the small mirror nailed to the wall, cracked at one corner and fastened the watch to his wrist one last time. He wanted to remember how it felt. The cool metal against his skin, the quiet rhythm of its heartbeat. Then he took it off. He wrapped it carefully in a clean corner of his shirt, tucked it into his pocket, and stepped outside. The morning air was warm, thick with the smell of dust and distant cooking fires. He didn't look back as he walked down the narrow path toward the main road. His steps were slow but determined. Each one felt like leaving a piece of himself behind. The pawn shop was a small, dim room tucked between a tea stall and a tailor's shop. Bells jingled as he pushed the door open. The owner, an old man with thick glasses and fingers stained yellow from years of handling paper and metal, looked up from his ledger. "Ah," the man said, recognizing him. Long time. He nodded, unable to speak at first. Then voice low. I need to sell something. He pulled out the watch and placed it gently on the glass counter. The shopkeeper picked it up, turned it over, squinted at the engraving on the back. His expression softened. This was your father's, wasn't it? He swallowed hard. Yes. The old man was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. I'll give you 2,000 rupees. Wasn't much. Not for a lifetime of memories. But it was enough. Enough for 5 kilos of rice, 2 of lentils, a liter of oil, some milk, maybe even a few onions and potatoes. Enough to feed his children properly for a week. Maybe 2 if he was careful. He nodded. Okay. The shopkeeper counted out the notes slowly, deliberately, as if giving him time to change his mind. But he didn't. He took the money, folded it into his pocket, and turned to leave. Wait. The old man called softly. He reached under the counter and pulled out a small packet of sugar candies, bright red, wrapped in wax paper. For the kids. He hesitated, then accepted it with a quiet thank you. Back on the street, the sun was higher now, beating down on his shoulders. He didn't feel its heat. All he felt was the empty space on his wrist and the weight of what he'd done. But also beneath the sadness, a flicker of relief. Tonight his children would eat. They wouldn't go to bed crying from hunger. That was worth more than any watch. He stopped at the market, bought everything on his mental list, and even added a small bar of soap, something they hadn't had in weeks. The shopkeepers didn't ask questions. They saw the limp, the tired eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly as he counted coins. They gave him a little extra here and there, a handful of coriander, an extra onion, a kind nod. By the time he returned to the hut, the children were awake, sitting outside in the shade, drawing shapes in the dirt with sticks. Their faces lit up when they saw him. Papa, you're back! He smiled, really smiled this time, and held up the bulging cloth bag. And I brought dinner, they cheered, jumping up and down, their earlier hunger forgotten in the excitement of full bellies to come. Inside, as he started cooking, onions sizzling in oil, lentils bubbling in the pot, he watched them through the doorway. They were laughing, playing a game only they understood, their voices light and carefree. For a moment, the world felt right again. He never told them about the watch, never mentioned the sacrifice. They didn't need to carry that weight. Their job was to be children, to laugh, to learn, to believe that tomorrow would be better. And as the smell of food filled the small hut, he whispered to himself more than to anyone else, it will be. He didn't know it yet. But tomorrow would bring something he never expected, something that would change everything. But for now, in this quiet moment, with his children safe and soon to be fed, that was enough. The pawn shop was quiet after the man left. Just the hum of an old ceiling fan, the occasional honk from the street outside, and the soft scratch of pen on paper as the shopkeeper updated his ledger. But something about that morning stayed with him, more than usual. Maybe it was the way the man's hands had trembled when he placed the watch on the counter, or how his eyes kept flicking toward the door, like he was half expecting his children to come running in, calling for him. Or maybe it was just the engraving on the back of that old timepiece. Time is precious, but love is timeless. The shopkeeper had seen plenty of people come in desperate, selling wedding rings, school books, even their children's shoes. But this felt different. This wasn't greed or laziness. This was a father doing the only thing he could to keep his kids from going hungry. And he'd done it without complaint, without drama, just quiet dignity. Later that afternoon, as the heat pressed down on the town like a heavy blanket, the shopkeeper sat outside his stall with a cup of strong, sweet tea. A regular customer, a newspaper reporter who covered local stories, stopped by for his usual chai and a chat. They talked about the rising price of onions, the broken water pump near the market, the new bus route that never showed up on time. Then, almost as an afterthought, the shopkeeper mentioned the man with the watch. He came in this morning, he said, stirring his tea slowly, sold his father's watch. Said he needed food for his children. The reporter paused, cup halfway to his lips. Which way does he live? Near the old railway crossing. That cluster of huts past the banyan tree. You know the one. Tin roof, blue door, clothes always drying on the line. The reporter nodded. He knew the area. He'd walked past it many times. He'd even seen the man once helping an elderly woman carry firewood during last year's rains. Quiet type. Never asked for anything. That evening, after feeding his own kids and tucking them into bed, the reporter sat at his small desk with his phone. He didn't write a formal article, not yet. Instead, he opened his social media account and typed a short post. Just a few lines. No photos of faces. No address. Nothing that could put the family at risk. He included a blurred image of the watch, focusing only on the engraving, not the brand or details that could identify it. Met a man today who sold his late father's only watch to buy rice for his children. He lives near the railway crossing. No complaints. No begging, just love. If anyone knows work for a hard-working man with a limp, please step forward. His kids deserve better. He hit post and went to sleep, not expecting much. Maybe a few likes, a comment or two from friends. That was all. But the internet doesn't always work that way. By midnight, the post had been shared over 100 times. By morning, it had crossed into neighboring towns. People saw it while checking scores, scrolling through recipes or waiting for their morning bus. And something about it stuck, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Too real. It reminded them of their own fathers, their uncles, the quiet sacrifices made behind closed doors. One of the first to see it was a retired Army officer who lived in a quiet lane on the other side of town. He recognized the railway crossing instantly, and then he remembered. The man who'd once helped him change a flat tire in the pouring rain 2 years ago. The same man had refused payment, saying, "Just help someone else when you can." The officer had never forgotten that. Now seeing the post, his chest tightened. He called his driver. "Get the car ready. We're going out early." Meanwhile, a schoolteacher scrolling through her phone during breakfast froze when she saw the mention of children near the railway crossing. She taught at the local primary school. One of her students, a bright-eyed girl with neat braids, had stopped coming to class 3 weeks ago. The girl's brother, too young for school, sometimes waited outside the gate with her. The teacher had assumed they'd moved, but now she checked her notes. The girl lived near the Blue Door hut. She messaged the reporter, "Is this about Mira and Arjun?" He replied, "I can't confirm names, but yes, 2 kids, boy and girl." Her eyes welled up. She packed 2 school notebooks, a pencil case, and a small box of crayons into her bag. At the same time, a young mechanic working the night shift at a garage saw the post on his brother's phone. He remembered the man limping past his shop every day, always polite, always looking for work. Once, when the mechanic's scooter broke down, the man had spent an hour helping him fix it, just because. "No charge," he'd said. "We all need a hand sometimes." The mechanic turned to his brother. "We're going to the railway crossing tomorrow, early." Word spread quietly, not like wildfire, but like roots growing under the soil. Steady, unseen, but strong. A grocer added extra bags of rice and lentils to his delivery list. A nurse from the community clinic packed vitamins and basic medicine. A woman who ran a small tailoring business folded 2 pairs of children's clothes, sturdy, clean, made with care, into a cloth bundle. None of them knew each other. They came from different parts of town, different walks of life, but they were all connected by one thing: the quiet image of a father who gave up his last keepsake so his children wouldn't go to bed hungry. Back at the hut, the man had no idea any of this was happening. That night, for the first time in weeks, his children ate a full meal. Dal, rice, even a few slices of onion fried in oil. They laughed over stories. The girl showing her brother how to draw a cat. The boy pretending the spoon was a sword. He watched them, heart full, exhaustion finally giving way to peace. He washed the dishes slowly, the warm water soothing his cracked hands. Then he sat outside under the stars, listening to the distant train whistle and the chirping of crickets. For a moment, he let himself hope. Maybe tomorrow he'd find odd work. Maybe someone would need help carrying bricks or cleaning a yard. Maybe things would turn. He didn't know that by sunrise. His life would shift in a way he couldn't imagine. He didn't know that kindness, once set in motion, has a way of gathering, like raindrops becoming a stream. Then a river, and he certainly didn't know that by morning. Cars would begin to line the narrow dirt path leading to his home, not with officials or strangers with cameras, but with people who'd seen his quiet act of love and decided to answer it with their own. Dawn came soft and pink over the fields, painting the sky in gentle strokes. Inside the small hut, the man stirred before the sun fully rose. His body ached from sleeping on the hard floor, but his mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. Last night's meal, simple but full, had given him a sliver of strength. He glanced at his children, still curled together under a thin blanket, their breathing slow and steady. For a moment, he just watched them. That was enough. He got up quietly, careful not to wake them, and stepped outside to wash his face at the hand pump near the neem tree. The water was cool, sharp against his skin. As he dried his face with the edge of his shirt, he heard it, the low rumble of an engine. Not unusual. Sometimes tractors or delivery vans passed on the main road, but this sound was different, closer, slower. He turned toward the path that led from the road to his hut and froze. A white SUV was pulling up, dust swirling behind its tires. Behind it, a small delivery van with a grocery logo on the side. Then a red hatchback. Then a motorcycle with a basket full of cloth bundles tied to the back. More vehicles were coming, some stopping, others slowing to a crawl as if unsure whether they were in the right place. His first thought wasn't hope. It was fear. Had someone reported him? Was this the police? Had he done something wrong? He quickly checked. No, he'd paid for everything he bought. He hadn't begged. He hadn't caused trouble. But still his heart hammered against his ribs. In his experience, when people in nice cars came to places like this, it was never good news. He stood rooted to the spot, hands slightly raised like he was ready to explain himself, to plead if needed. But then the SUV door opened, and an older man stepped out, tall, straight-backed, wearing simple cotton clothes and polished shoes. He didn't look angry, he looked kind. The man walked slowly toward the hut, hands open at his sides, no threat in his posture. Behind him, others began to get out of their vehicles too, some carrying bags, others holding boxes, a woman with a small medical kit, a young man with a toolbox slung over his shoulder. The older man stopped a few feet away. He didn't speak right away, just looked at the hut, at the patched roof, at the children's toys made of sticks and string lying near the door. Then he looked the father in the eyes. "You're the one who sold your watch," he said, not as a question but as a quiet fact. The father nodded, throat tight. "Yes," the older man's eyes softened. "I'm the one who saw your tire on the highway 2 years ago. You helped me change it in the rain. Remember?" Recognition flickered. The father did remember. The old man struggling with a jack soaked to the bone. He'd stayed for nearly an hour, refusing tea, refusing money. "Just pass it on," he'd said then. Now the old man reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded note, the same social media post, printed on paper. "Someone shared your story, not to shame you, to honor you." Behind him, the grocer stepped forward with 2 large sacks. "Rice and lentils," he said simply. "Enough for a month." The schoolteacher held out a cloth bag. "Notebooks, pencils, crayons, and shoes your daughter's size, I think." She'd remembered the girl's feet always bare in class. The mechanic placed a small toolkit on the ground. "If anything breaks, a door hinge, a pot handle, the roof, I'll fix it." "No charge." The nurse opened her kit. "Vitamins for the kids. Iron tablets for you. And this," she added, handing over a sealed packet, "is for when the rains come. Fever medicine." One by one, they offered what they could, not with pity, but with respect. No one took photos. No one asked for a speech. They just stood there, a quiet circle of strangers who had become something else overnight. Neighbors. The father didn't know what to say. His eyes burned. He tried to speak, but words wouldn't come. He bowed his head, shoulders shaking slightly. Not from shame, from relief so deep it felt like drowning in air. Then from inside the hut, a small voice. "Papa?" His daughter stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, her brother peeking out behind her. She looked at the crowd, wide-eyed but not scared. Just curious, the schoolteacher knelt down. "Hello," she said gently. "I brought you something to draw with." The girl glanced at her father. He gave a small nod. She stepped forward, took the bag, and peeked inside. Her face lit up. "Colors." That broke the tension. People smiled. Someone chuckled softly. The boy, emboldened, ran out and picked up a shiny orange from a fruit basket someone had left near the gate. He held it like treasure. The retired officer turned to the father. "We didn't come to make you feel small," he said. "We came because you reminded us what matters." The father finally found his voice. I didn't want anyone to know." "We know," the officer said, "but sometimes letting others help is its own kind of strength." As the morning warmed, the group didn't rush off. They stayed. The grocer showed him how to store rice to keep bugs out. The mechanic checked the roof for leaks. The nurse sat with the children, checking their eyes, their skin, asking gentle questions. A woman who ran a community kitchen brought a pot of hot porridge. "For breakfast," she said, and insisted everyone eat together, right there on the ground, sharing spoons and stories. Neighbors from nearby huts came out too, drawn by the unusual sight. At first they watched from a distance, but when they saw no cameras, no officials, just people helping people, they joined in. One brought a mat to sit on. Another offered tea. A teenager offered to walk the children to school once classes resumed. No one made a show of it. There were no speeches, no grand declarations. Just hands passing food, voices offering help, eyes meeting with understanding. And in the middle of it all, the father sat quietly, watching his children laugh as they peeled oranges and shared them with strangers. For the first time in months, he didn't feel alone. He didn't feel like a failure. He felt seen, not for his poverty but for his love. Later, as the crowd began to thin and cars started to leave, the retired officer placed a hand on his shoulder one last time. "There's talk of a job managing the new community kitchen," he said. "Steady work indoors, good for your leg." "I'll put in a word." The father nodded, tears welling again, but this time they were warm. As the last vehicle disappeared down the dusty road, he stood in the quiet that followed. Not the heavy silence of before, but a peaceful calm. The ground was littered with empty bags, fruit peels, and a few stray crayons. His children were drawing on a scrap of paper, chattering about school. He looked at his bare wrist, the place where the watch used to be. It felt lighter now, not because he'd lost something, but because he'd gained something far greater. The quiet certainty that he wasn't carrying this burden alone anymore. And somewhere, in a town not far away, a watch sat wrapped in cloth on a shop counter, waiting to come home. The days that followed were unlike any the man had known in years. Not because everything was suddenly perfect, life still had its rough edges, but because the crushing weight of carrying it all alone had lifted. People kept coming, not in crowds anymore, but one or two at a time, like quiet drops of rain after a long drought. A woman from the next village brought a sewing machine she no longer used. "My daughter moved to the city," she said. "Maybe your girl can learn something useful." The school teacher returned with uniforms, neat, stitched with care, and walked the children to school herself on the first day back. The boy held her hand tightly, eyes wide at the chalkboards and rows of desks. The girl clutched her new pencil case like it was made of gold. The community kitchen job came through faster than anyone expected. The retired officer had spoken to the right people, and within a week the man was standing in a clean tiled room with shelves of rice, lentils, and spices, overseeing meals for dozens of families in need. The work was steady, mostly sitting or light walking, easy on his leg, and for the first time in months he brought home a proper wage, wrapped in paper and tied with string, like something precious. But even with food in the house and work in his days, one thing still sat heavy in his chest: the watch. He never spoke of it, but sometimes when he washed his hands or reached for a pot, his fingers would brush his bare wrist, and he'd pause. It wasn't just a timepiece, it was his father's voice, his wedding day, every promise he'd ever made to be better, do better. Selling it had been necessary, but losing it felt like losing a part of himself. He didn't expect it to come back. He'd made peace with that. Then one evening, as he sat outside mending a torn school bag with clumsy stitches, a small boy from down the lane ran up, breathless. "Uncle, someone left this for you at the tea stall." In the boy's hand was a cloth bundle tied neatly with twine. No note, no name, just the bundle. The man took it slowly, heart thudding for no reason he could name. He untied the knot, peeled back the layers of soft cotton, and there it was. His watch. Cleaned. Polished. The glass still scratched. The strap still worn, but ticking steadily, faithfully, as if it had never left. Tucked beneath it was a small slip of paper with just 5 words written in neat handwriting. Some things shouldn't be sold. He sat there for a long time, the watch resting in his palm, warm from being carried. He didn't cry, not right away, but his breath came slow and deep, like he was breathing for the first time in years. He fastened it back on his wrist. The weight felt right, familiar, like coming home. That night, over a simple dinner of rice and vegetable curry, his daughter noticed it. "Papa, your watch is back." He nodded, smiling. "Yes, Beta. It came home. Did someone find it?" the boy asked, mouth full. "Someone knew it belonged here," he said softly. He didn't explain more. Some things didn't need explaining. Word of the watch's return spread quietly through the town, not as gossip but as a kind of quiet miracle. People smiled when they heard. They didn't ask who returned it. They didn't need to. In a place where kindness had become a chain reaction, it could have been anyone. The shopkeeper, the officer, the teacher, even the grocer. And maybe that was the point. It didn't matter who. What mattered was that someone cared enough to give back what had been given up in love. As weeks passed, life settled into a new rhythm. The children went to school every day, their shoes clean, their books filled with neat handwriting. The girl started drawing pictures of her teacher, her brother, even the man who fixed their roof. She taped one to the wall, a stick-figure family standing under a big sun, all holding hands. The man rose early each morning, walked to the community kitchen, and worked with quiet focus. He wasn't just cooking, he was listening. He remembered which families had babies, which elders needed softer food, which children came alone. He started adding a little extra dal to certain bowls, a boiled egg here and there, not because he was told to, but because he knew what it felt like to count every grain. People began calling him uncle at the kitchen, not out of pity but respect. Even the volunteers, many younger than him, asked his advice on how to stretch ingredients or calm a crying child waiting for food. One afternoon, as he was sweeping the kitchen floor, the retired officer stopped by again. This time he wasn't alone. With him was a representative from a small nonprofit that supported education in rural areas. "We've been watching," the officer said simply. "You've got a good head and a kind heart. They want to cover your children's school fees, books, uniforms, everything for the next 3 years. The man stood still, broom in hand. "Why?" he asked, not out of suspicion but wonder. "Because you showed us what dignity looks like," the nonprofit worker said. "Even when you had nothing, you gave everything. That's the kind of example we want to support." He didn't argue. He just nodded, eyes glistening. "Thank you," he said, and meant it with every bone in his body. That evening, he sat with his children under the neem tree and told them about school, the new books they'd get, the science experiments they'd do, the stories they'd read. The boy's eyes widened. "Will I learn to build bridges?" "Maybe," the man said, ruffling his hair. "If you study hard," the girl hugged her doll tightly. "I want to be a teacher." "Like hers," he smiled. "Then you will." Later, as the stars came out one by one, he sat alone for a few minutes, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of the town. The watch ticked softly on his wrist, a steady, quiet heartbeat. He thought of his father, gone many years now but somehow still present in that simple piece of metal. He thought of his wife, who would have been so proud of their children. And he thought of all the strangers who had become lifelines without asking for anything in return. He didn't believe in miracles, not the flashy kind with lightning and fanfare. But he believed in this, that one act of love, however small, could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. That a father selling a watch to feed his kids could somehow bring a whole community together. And as the night deepened, cool and calm, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because he knew he wasn't alone anymore. And that, more than anything, was enough. A year had passed since the day the cars gathered around the hut. The tin roof still bore the same rust-colored patches, but now it was shaded by a new blue tarp someone had donated during the last monsoon. The path leading to the door, once muddy and uneven, had been smoothed with gravel by a group of local youths who'd taken it upon themselves to fix Uncle's lane. Even the neem tree seemed to stand taller, its branches casting a wider, kinder shadow over the small yard, where children's drawings now fluttered on a clothesline like bright flags of hope. Inside, the man sat on a low wooden stool, peeling potatoes for dinner. His movements were steady, his limp barely noticeable now, less from his leg healing completely and more from the fact that he no longer carried the weight of despair in his step. On his wrist, the watch ticked softly, its face catching the golden light of late afternoon. He still glanced at it not to check the time, but to remember that love, once given, never truly disappears. It just finds its way back. His children were at school, something that still filled him with quiet awe every morning. The girl had been chosen to recite a poem at the annual function. The boy, once shy and hesitant, now raised his hand in class to answer questions about rivers and stars. Their uniforms were clean, their shoes scuffed from play, their laughter loud and unburdened. They no longer counted grains of rice or wondered if dinner would come. They dreamed instead of becoming teachers, engineers, maybe even writers. The community kitchen had become more than a job. It had become a second home. He knew the names of every child who came through the gate, the stories behind the tired eyes of the mothers, the quiet pride of the elders who refused to ask for help until they had no choice. He'd started a small shelf of donated books near the entrance. For waiting hands, he called it. Sometimes while rice simmered and lentils bubbled, he'd read aloud to the little ones. They'd sit cross-legged on the floor, eyes wide, as if stories could fill more than just bellies. One afternoon, as he was packing leftover meals for families who couldn't come in person, the retired officer walked in, not in his usual crisp shirt, but in simple cotton carrying a small potted plant. "Mango sapling," he said, placing it gently by the kitchen window. "Planted one in my yard, too. Thought yours might like a friend." The man smiled. "It'll grow fast here. Good soil." They sat together for a while, sipping tea from chipped cups, watching sparrows hop along the roof edge. No big words were exchanged. Just silence, comfortable and full. Later that week, the school teacher stopped by with report cards. Both children had passed with good marks. "Your daughter wrote an essay," she said, handing him a folded sheet of paper. "It's about her hero." He opened it carefully. In neat, careful handwriting, his daughter had written, "My papa is my hero. He works hard. He never yells. When we had no food, he gave his watch so we could eat. But he got it back because good things come back when you are kind. I want to be like him." He read it twice, then folded it slowly and tucked it into the inside pocket of his shirt, right over his heart. Life wasn't perfect. There were still days when the electricity went out, when the rain leaked through a corner of the roof, when the boy came home with a scraped knee and tears in his eyes. But now when trouble came, he didn't face it alone. The grocer would send extra onions by mistake. The mechanic would show up with a patch for the roof before he even asked. The nurse checked in every month, not just on the children, but on him too. "You can't pour from an empty cup," she'd say. And every evening, without fail, he sat with his children after dinner. No screens, no distractions. Just stories. Sometimes from books, sometimes from his own childhood, sometimes made up on the spot. The girl would lean against his shoulder. The boy would lie on the floor, tracing shapes in the air with his finger. And in those moments, time didn't feel like something slipping away. It felt like something being built, brick by quiet brick. One Sunday morning, as the sun rose pink and soft over the fields, the man walked to the old pawn shop. Not to sell anything, just to visit. The shopkeeper looked up from his ledger, glasses perched low on his nose. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded as if he'd been expecting this. The man reached into his pocket and placed a small envelope on the counter. Inside were a few crisp notes, more than the watch had been worth, but not so much it would insult the old man's pride. "For your kindness," he said simply. The shopkeeper stared at it, then at the watch on the man's wrist. He shook his head, but his eyes shone. "Keep it," he said. "Use it to buy your children ice cream or books. Or dreams." They sat together for a while, sipping tea, watching the street come alive. No grand speeches. Just two men who understood that sometimes the deepest changes happen in silence. As the man walked home, he passed the banyan tree, the railway crossing, the same path he'd walked that desperate morning a year ago. But everything felt different now, not because the road had changed, but because he had. He carried hope the way he once carried worry, quietly, constantly, like a second heartbeat. That night, as he tucked his children into bed, the girl whispered, "Papa, do you think Mama would be happy?" He paused, then kissed her forehead. She'd be smiling so wide, Beta, every single day. Outside, the village settled into its evening rhythm. Dogs barking, pots clanging, neighbors calling to each other across lanes. The watch on his wrist ticked on, steady and sure. He stepped onto the porch and looked up at the sky, thick with stars. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe more rain, maybe more work, maybe new challenges, but he knew this. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living, and he was loved, not because he had much to give, but because he'd given everything he had when it mattered most. And in the quiet hum of the night, with his children breathing peacefully inside and the stars watching over them all, that was more than enough. The story wasn't supposed to have a sixth part. 5 parts felt complete, like a circle closing, a seed growing into a tree, a watch returning to its rightful wrist. But life doesn't always follow neat chapters. Sometimes it keeps writing quietly in the margins. 2 years after the cars first gathered around the hut, something unexpected happened, not loud or dramatic, but the kind of quiet shift that only shows up when you're paying attention. The man still worked at the community kitchen, but now he wasn't just managing meals. He'd started teaching others how to cook with less, how to stretch a handful of lentils into a pot full of nourishment, how to use every part of a vegetable, how to make simple food taste like love. Young volunteers came to learn from him, not because he had fancy training, but because he knew hunger and how to fight it with dignity. One of those volunteers was a quiet teenager from a nearby village, barely 16, with eyes that held too much worry for someone so young. He'd lost his father the year before and was now the main support for his mother and 2 younger sisters. He barely spoke at first, just watched, swept floors, washed pots. But the man noticed how the boy's hands shook when he counted his bus fare, how he sometimes skipped lunch to save money. One afternoon, as they peeled onions side by side, the man handed him an extra roti wrapped in cloth. "Take it home," he said, not looking up. "Your sisters might like it." The boy's eyes filled, but he didn't say thank you. He just nodded, tucked the roti into his bag, and kept peeling. Weeks passed. The boy kept coming. One day, he stayed late to help fix a broken shelf. Another day, he brought his mother's homemade pickles to share. Slowly, he began to speak about school, about his sister's dreams, about how scared he was of failing them. The man listened, not with advice, but with presence. And one evening, as the sun dipped low, he said, "You don't have to carry it all alone." Those words, simple, ordinary, landed like a stone in still water. The boy cried then quietly, shoulders shaking, tears mixing with the dust on his cheeks. The man didn't pat his back or say, "It'll be okay." He just sat beside him in the silence, letting the weight be shared. That moment became a turning point, not just for the boy, but for the man himself. He realized his story wasn't just about survival anymore. It was becoming a bridge. Word spread, not online this time, but the old way. Through whispers at the market, conversations over tea, mothers telling mothers. More young people started showing up at the kitchen, not just to eat, but to learn, to help, to find a place where they weren't judged for what they lacked, but valued for what they could give. With help from the nonprofit and a few generous locals, the kitchen expanded. A small room was added, not for storage, but for learning. They called it the sharing room. Here the man taught basic cooking and budgeting. The school teacher held evening reading sessions. The nurse gave talks on hygiene and health. Even the retired officer came once a month to teach the kids how to tie knots, read maps, and stand tall. It wasn't a school. It wasn't a shelter. It was something in between, a space where dignity was the currency and kindness the curriculum. The man's own children thrived. The girl had started writing stories of her own, about brave grandfathers, talking trees, and watches that never stopped ticking. Her teacher sent one to a children's magazine, and to everyone's surprise, it was published. The day the letter arrived, the whole lane celebrated. The grocer gave free sweets. The mechanic hung a handmade banner, "Our writer." The boy, now taller, stronger, had discovered a love for numbers. He helped the man keep the kitchen accounts, tallying rice and oil with careful precision. "Maybe I'll be an accountant," he said one evening, showing his father a neatly balanced ledger. The man ruffled his hair and said, "You'll be whatever you set your mind to." But the biggest change wasn't in what they had, it was in how they saw the world. They no longer looked at strangers with suspicion, but with curiosity. They shared their lunch with classmates who forgot theirs. They saved coins in a tin can to buy notebooks for kids who couldn't afford them. They'd learned, without being told, that giving wasn't about having extra. It was about remembering what it felt like to have nothing. One rainy afternoon, as the man sat mending a torn school bag again, the teenager who'd once cried over an extra roti walked in, holding a small box. "I got a part-time job at the library," he said, voice steady now. They pay me every week. He opened the box. Inside was a brand new watch, simple stainless steel with a leather strap.